So it is now time for a dialogue between two very inspiring persons, I think. We have on the one hand Monica Skadborg. Monica is the youth climate pact ambassador in Denmark. She's also board member of the European Youth Forum. And Monica, she studies environmental engineering at the Technical University of Denmark. Her studies have focused on climate impacts, also on circular economy, and on sustainable production. She also has a long history in student organizations and recently with the European Students' Union, where she was working on sustainability as one of the issues. And she has been working on climate and sustainability issues in many different ways, being the chairperson for the Danish Youth Climate Council and also a youth delegate to the United Nations. And the purpose of the Youth Climate Council is to be a bridge between the young climate activists and the decision makers. So I think that's really a very good experience to be having as we start the conversations today. I think it's important to remember the importance of ensuring the youth voice into the debates with the policymakers, ensuring that they are really taken seriously. That we often say that young people are the future, and that's true, but they are also the present, and their voice needs to be heard here and now. So that is Monica, and the other person that we are having with us is Professor von Weizsäcker, who's born in Switzerland, and he has a graduation from the University of Hamburg in physics. And he has also a PhD in biology. He has been working in the academic field for many, many years. In 1981, he was joining the United Nations in New York as director at the UN Center for Science and Technology. And he has a very long and rich experience, and he has achieved many awards. And I wanted just to mention that he has been an honorary counselor of the World Future Council. The World Future Council works to pass on a healthy and sustainable planet with just and peaceful societies to our children and to our grandchildren. And I think that's another very good entry point into the conversation that we will be having just now. So we will have a discussion between Monica and between Ernst on the environmental movements yesterday and today. So it's really, the idea is really to have an intergenerational dialogue. So I think I'll start actually by just giving the floor to Professor Weizsäcker to give us a little bit of an explanation about the work that you have done, your personal experience as well, on the environmental movement and how you got inspired to work to protect the environment. I think starting as early on as in the 70s, and what was your experience at that time? And yeah, so I think I'll just open the conversation in that way to give you the floor. And then we pass it on to Monica to give her a little bit of information about the work today and some of her thoughts today. And then we will be seeing what can be learned from the different generations as we go ahead. Thank you.
We're just going to call in a minute. Can you just start with Monica? Sorry.
Yes, sure. So Monica, let's start with the present, a little bit about your experience today and some of your thoughts today as being very actively involved in the youth climate movement. Thank you, Monica.
Thank you. Yeah, so what we're up to today in the youth climate movement, well, right before COVID, it was a lot of striking physically in the streets. It's been a little bit less of that since we have, the actual plague going on for the moment. But other than that, what's going on in the climate movement is luckily a lot of organizations who weren't so explicitly climate focused starting to recognize that on the timeline we live on, that is the most urgent issue for them to be dealing with as well. So that's a really interesting development that we see student organizations and young Christian organizations and scouts and all of these very diverse actors starting to recognize that it's in line with their core missions to get on this and to fight this crisis that is going to, as was mentioned before, just kill a whole lot of people, right? And make a whole lot of human suffering. So that's the sort of interesting movement that's going on right now. It's the intersectional coming together of different types of actors who all want to contribute to this fight in their own way. So that's very hope-inducing, at least for me, that we see all of these different member organizations in the Youth Forum coming to the fight in their own ways. And we see, in general, the consciousness of especially young people, but also people in general, growing. I can get worried that it might not be as quickly as we need it to be, but there's definitely a growing recognition of just how much trouble we're actually in and the responsibility that puts on everyone to do something.
And do you feel supported and listened to, Monica? Do you feel that the activism of the younger generation is taken on as we should, or what would be your also call to us here? Yeah, because you were mentioning that sometimes it's carried perhaps particularly by the younger generation. Do you feel that there is an awareness as a kind of consciousness about the urgency in the here and now, and about the radical choices that we might need to make for the common good, which is the safeguarding of the planet?
I feel like there is a little bit of a gap still there, because as young people, we do live on a different timeline. I still sometimes show up to events where people start talking about their grandchildren, which is, allowed if your grandchildren have my age, but if they don't, then it's not our grandchildren we're talking about. It's very now. The WHO says that it's going to be an early 250,000 extra deaths per year from 2040 onwards. It's in 18 years, everyone. And I feel like it might not have occurred to everyone where on the timeline we are right now. Some people still tend to think of it as like the next generation's problem, and we're way past that. And it is reflected in some of the political decision making, like when people are making national budgets and fighting over some of these things, how to spend the money, but then can't find sufficient money for the green transition, even though it's going to save us money, because mitigation is actually cheaper than adaptation, right?
And Monica, before passing on, do you think you can give a little bit of a background on what made you get involved in this in this fight, if I can call it a fight for the common, like for the planet, for the environment, and what motivates you today as well?
Yeah, so I'm motivated by love in a very Corinthians 13th kind of way, and that comes out in the priorities I make on my time. What kind of work life and volunteering life I'm engaged in, what kind of local church congregation I chose to align with, and a lot of other choices, what I do and do not eat even. And the reason for that is that I think that humans have this obligation to care for each other, and that the destruction of the environment we live in and the amount of death and suffering that is already causing and going to cause is like the most urgent and most unfair thing humans are doing to each other at the moment. So that, if you follow that logic through, which I decided to do like a decade ago, then that really does entail, well, looking the science in the eye of, first of all, of how much in trouble we are, and then making choices that actually align with that. So acting as though we care as much for our fellow men as we supposedly have to do. Christian perspective in my case, I think any moral or religious compass would if you really take it seriously, probably lead many people to much of the same conclusions. So yeah, that's what happened to me. That's what I'm on about. Curious to hear what other people are on about.
Thank you so much. And I can see also that Professor Weizsäcker is with us now. So perhaps what we can do is to pass the floor to Professor Weizsäcker to give a little bit of a background about how was the environmental movement working some time back, how has it been developing, and what are the similarities, what are the challenges that might remain or might not remain? Has there been signs of hope along the way? Have there been signs of despair along the way? And what are the signs? So if that is okay, Professor Weizsäcker, I think I'll just pass over the floor to you, and then we can more easily have a conversation with this intergenerational perspective. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, very good. I shall be brief. First, there was a sort of aristocratic nature protection sentiment in the 19th century when the first national parks were invented, but it was, and also I happen to remember from Italy that shooting birds was the privilege of the rich, of the aristocrats. So it was sort of an elitist kind of thing. Then in the 1960s, 70s, we had totally different concern. There it was essentially the poor who said, dirty water, dirty air, dirty soil is unfair. It was the time of, what was the famous book? Anyway, in the 1960s, I forgot the name, saying that the world is getting dirty and we have to do something about it. Meaning that politics needed to establish the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, etc. in America, and similar things in Japan, actually even a little earlier, and in Western Europe. And that was also the trigger for the first United Nations Conference on the Human Environment in Stockholm, 1972. However, that was essentially a short-term kind of management. In a matter of 10 years or so, most of the big dirts in the rich countries, that is, were more or less disappearing. Then there was a slight coming off the pollution concerns in the mid-1980s, in particular in Germany, where we had the so-called Waldsterben, the dieback of forests. That was also air pollution, which had to be somehow controlled. But all that had nothing to do with climate change at the time. Some scientists knew already there was something wrong. Also in the mid-1980s, studies were made in the Antarctic and Greenland ice, and they found out that the ice ages were also periods of very low carbon dioxide concentrations, while the warm periods were the periods of high carbon dioxide concentration, meaning that the scientific community began to understand that global warming has something to do with carbon dioxide. And that led then finally to the first international global conferences on, global warming, leading to the IPCC and all that. And more or less at the same time, some of the old findings about disappearing species, etc., led to a global concern of biodiversity losses. So when in 1992, the so-called Earth Summit was held in Rio de Janeiro, two major new United Nations what was it? Rules of global warming and biodiversity were adopted. And we had annual climate conferences and biannual biodiversity conferences. This went on, and global warming, according to American and German scientists, has become also the root for weather disasters like flooding and drought and wildfires, etc. Okay, so much everybody knows. And then in the year 2018, a quarter century after the Rio conference, in Europe, we had dry weather year by year, and huge wildfires. In Sweden alone, we had 28 big wildfires. That was the trigger for the then 15-year-old Greta Thunberg to go for a protest against global warming, sitting before the Chamber of Parliament protesting. And that led to the future, how is it called? You know that,
Fridays for the Future?
Fridays for Future. And then the Grandmas for Future and the Scientists for Future, etc. Everybody was excited by the young folks going to, taking to the street, protesting. So that, in a nutshell, has been the history of environmental questions. How to deal with global warming is 100 times more difficult than dealing with local air pollution and water pollution. For one reason, I have a chart available showing in the 8 most important segments of economics, such as trade, industry, transport, etc. 8, where we have a strict correlation between economic success and carbon dioxide emissions. There is a very strong correlation between the two. Poor countries have little emissions, rich countries have high emissions, but everybody wants to be rich. So turning around richness as a symbol of doing something about global warming is an almost impossible challenge. But this is precisely why I'm saying it's 100 times more difficult. But we can do it. I mean, I have numbers of recipes which you can do, but that is maybe something for the broader discussion. Okay?
Yes, thank you so much, Professor Weizsäcker. So that was very good to listen to you as well. So you were mentioning some of the strives that you were having at the time, but also how the young generation has been inspiring, yeah, for you and for us all. I wanted to hear from you, like, can you mention something that you feel like this we did right at the time that the younger generation could learn from us, and perhaps also another example of like what does the younger generation do right now that you could have learned from them, or that you learned from them actually? And then I'm going to ask the same question to Monica, if that is fine with you. Like, is there something that you feel that you could learn from what has been done before, and that you would still need now to have in today's environmental conversations and fight? And what are you doing good that you know is new and that we should build on for the future as well? So first, Professor Weizsäcker, please.
Okay, call me just Ernst. I was young in the 1970s, evidently, and I was rebellious, and I was really shocked by the local pollution. So I co-founded a little group in the center of the Ruhr area, which has been the dirtiest part of Germany, to do something about it, and forbidding kind of smokestack, etc., etc. So my learning from the scientific evidence was you have to engage. And what Greta Thunberg said 50 years later or more was more or less the same consideration. I am young, and I know that global warming is something for the next 100 years. So the young should be the first ones to be rebellious.
Thank you. Thank you, Ernst. I just wrote in the chat as well that everyone who wishes to also intervene or to ask a question are free to do so. You can raise your virtual hands or your physical hands, but then you might need also to open your mic so that I properly see you. But first, maybe Monica, do you want to react, and do you want to add your thoughts, please?
Yeah, I think that's a good lesson to take about the importance of being rebellious. And I know that is one of the primary lessons that current movements are taking from previous ones. Been to a whole lot of mobilization meetings where to try to encourage individuals to join us and to come striking and to illustrate that it matters. People bring examples of the civil rights movement and other movements of honestly not that many people that spiraled into something that really changed the world. Because it's easy to look at the huge scale of the problem and think that, oh, it won't matter if I join a green organization, it won't matter if I strike, it won't matter if I convince my local church to give their lawn over to the bees. But you only need a few percentage of the population to start doing things to get the ball rolling. And we have all these historical examples of real progress being made from that. I mean, I can vote. that's pretty cool. It was very few women who got that started initially. And we do have that lesson with us. So there is this consciousness in the climate movements about being part of a tradition of civil disobedience in some cases for those who use those methods, or of striking in some cases for those who do that, and how that is tools that do work and is worth spending time on. Obviously, the non-violent direct action civil disobedience people have with them a little catalog of how that is meaningful, and how the people who've been doing that have, consistently been on the right side of history, honestly. So we do take lessons of that with us that are helpful. Something that I think the youth movements have right at the moment is also that they have their priorities straight. They're able to look at a national budget full of difficult issues and go, well, my pension won't matter super much if we don't fix climate change, because then we're going to be spending all that money on dikes and climate refugees and healthcare effects of climate change and other very expensive things. So we have a will to get the priorities straight in the present, and to disregard some of the other divisions that are present in society, and say, well, that can wait, because if we don't fix this thing over here, then people are literally going to die. Another thing that I think they have right is it's people of all sort of political colors that are recognizing this. It's not a left-wing issue to not want the planet to be on fire, which I think is helpful. I know that some few people on both sides still do believe that, well, either that's only for lefties to care about, or that only lefties have the right solution to it. But in general, over the entire political spectrum, people are sort of recognizing, well, distribution policies aren't going to matter super much if we don't fix this overwhelming common enemy that we all have of this problem. Then they have differences in how they want to solve it, but it's a good recognition to have if you want to move forward, that this isn't a partisan issue so much anymore.
Thank you, Monica. I think you are really now at the core also what Laudato Si is all about, and showing that everything is interconnected, and that the different issues that we are trying to tackle, they will have consequences that go far beyond the environmental issues. It's really about the people. It's really about our future. It's really about ensuring that we are creating a world that is possible to live in for the future, and it's about the human dignity as well. So I can see that there is a question in the chat now. It's for Ernst. It's just that this was an interesting overview of the history of the environmental movement, but that he didn't hear you make a connection with Club of Rome's, the limits to growth, and today's ask for degrowth, or the donut economy. Can you say something about this connection too, is the question.
Of course, great pleasure. I've been a member of the Club of Rome since 1991 or so, and was, of course, full of admiration for the Limits to Growth book by Dana Meadows, Dennis Meadows, Jürgen Randers, and a fourth one. But I looked into the history. The founder of the Club of Rome, Aurelio Peccei, was an Italian industrialist, and he was concerned about rebellions world over totally different things, such as in Czechoslovakia, against communism, against the Russians. The rebellion in Berkeley, in other university towns of the world, against bad further education. then against the Vietnam War, and also some rebellion against local pollution. And then he was thinking of the so-called predicament of mankind. The initiative by the Club of Rome was a broad field of concerns worldwide about the predicament of mankind. Why should everybody be rebellious? And then they had a team chaired by Professor, what was his name? At the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And he brought together 4 or 5 young people and asked them to work on the predicament of mankind. And they found out that what for Aurelio Peccei had not been so important was the consumption of natural goods, such as minerals, water, and energy, and began to calculate, because they had a very primitive mathematics, what is the predicament of mankind with regard to natural resources. And they found out, with their very primitive mathematics, that in a matter of 100 years, the full world would be turned into a resource empty world. And that was the big shock, you know? And then in 1972, still, I mean, the book came out in 1972, the first United Nations Conference on the Human Environment came on, and the leader of the conference, Maurice Strong from Canada, made reference no end to the Club of Rome. So it became extremely famous and scary. So the number of people going to Greenpeace, the number of young people creating new environmental groups, etc., worldwide, was the effect, in a sense, of the book, The Limits to Growth, by the Club of Rome, or by this team in the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. Forrester was the name of the professor. And so many people today believe that it was the Club of Rome that created the worldwide agitation about deterioration of the environment. I'm sorry having forgotten that. Meanwhile, another thing just returned to my mind, namely the lady who wrote that book in the 1960s prior to the Club of Rome was Rachel Carson, and her book was called Silent Spring. That was, in a sense, the trigger also for the Club of Rome.
Thank you so much. Does Kyle Malfrid feel that the question was answered? Yeah, good. I think we also have a question from Cinzia. So I invite you to take the floor.
Hi, everybody. I just have a question that can be answered both by Monica and Ernst, and it has to do with the integral ecology paradigm that is described in the Encyclical Laudato Si, and how can we channel the energy of the rebellion into concrete policy propositions moving forward. Have you, for Ernst, have you harvested your rebellion energy through your career, even when you were at the Bundestag, at the presiding the environmental committee? Did you manage to bring that that energy there? And Monica, moving forward, do you see yourself committing to engage in policy making or politics? And how do we move forward? How can you inspire us in our work to be more effective in what we do? Thank you.
Yes, I'd be happy to say a few words. Prior to my being member of parliament, I was the founding president of the Wuppertal Institute for Climate, Environment and Energy. And there I sort of was able, together with a wonderful team of people, of establishing more or less the answers to your question. And one of the key idea was higher efficiency of the use of natural goods. And I had written a book 10 years earlier, or a little less, with Amory Lovins from America, which was called Factor 4, Doubling Wealth, Halving Resource Use. We can do at least 4 times more efficient in energy, water, and minerals. And then at the Wuppertal Institute, I went a step further with a book called Factor 5, which I wrote together with an Australian team, which says a factor 4 is not enough, a factor 5 could be. And some say it a factor of 10, meaning that a decoupling can occur between human well-being and the use of natural resources. And then I was being elected for the Social Democrats in the German parliament, the Bundestag, and helped initiate first an ecological tax reform, making the use of energy more expensive and the use of human labor less expensive, which helped shift the economic priorities towards efficient energy and more employment, more jobs. So that was a great political success story. And the then finance minister, Oscar Lafontaine, was very, very helpful. Also the chancellor, Gerhard Schröder. And then a friend of mine, Hermann Scheer, also a social democrat with whom I was friends for 30 years earlier, said, we need a new legislation for renewable energies. And I said, yes, I think that sounds like a good idea, but a kilowatt hour of solar energy under today's conditions would cost more than $1, rather $2. So it won't be economically attractive. And then Hermann Scheer said to me, oh, that is only the beginning. But if we give financial compensation to the people feeding in renewable electricity into the grid, it will become cheaper, cheaper, cheaper every year. So I helped him to persuade our party and the Green Party to adopt that renewable energies law. And indeed, it happened exactly as Hermann Scheer predicted. Year by year by year, photovoltaics got cheaper. And nowadays, in cold countries like Germany, a solar panel electricity costs only 5 euro cents, 20 times less than in the year 2000 when we adopted the law. And in the North African region, like Algeria or so, a kilowatt hour of photovoltaics electricity costs 1 euro cent, which is 100 times less than it was the case in 2000. So in a mere 20 years, we had the drama of making renewable energies available. So that essentially is something where politics with a new law can come in, and the broader public falling in love with the new renewable energies.
Thank you so much, Ernst, for this example. Do you want to complement to that? Add something, Monica?
I think that's a good example. The large fights going on right now on the political level are carbon taxation, so changing tax incentives so that companies are actually willing to transition the way that they're doing things. Some of what is causing the mess that we're in right now is that pollution is essentially free. So you can cause a whole lot of damage to society and you don't have to pay for it. And that makes highly polluting products artificially cheap, and then the rest of society picks up the bill in the form of, for example, healthcare expenses that come along with that. So changing that is a big battle going on in many countries right now. Then there's also the getting the necessary investments out of our governments for the energy transition primarily, and for speeding up some of the transitions that won't happen without governmental interventions. So that's really challenging. And there's also an international distributional question going on. We in the wealthy nations honestly owe a lot of money to the not so wealthy nations right now. And we low-key promised them that we would give them money as a part of the Paris Agreement, because what we want to happen is that people can get richer without destroying the globe. Otherwise, we're all in big trouble. And the nations that had historically polluted a lot and that can honestly afford it sort of did promise to give a lot of money to other countries that are in a bit more trouble on this. And then we didn't give them that money. So that's also a bit of a fight to get that money out of our governments and into the hands of the nations that really need it, so that they can, not cause any more climate change, and also prepare themselves for the fact that some of their islands are on the way into the ocean, and that it is, our fault, largely.
Thank you, Monica. And I think that also links a lot, again, back to Laudato Si and the fact that we are one human family, and the steps that we shall be taking are for the common good, and trying to look beyond our personal interests and our own economy, but that is really for the common good. And doing something for the common good is also doing something for ourselves. I mean, it's not. It's really, again, it should be this positive journey. It should be this hopeful journey. And perhaps you'd like to add, I don't know, because you were also mentioning, Monica, before, the role that parishes can play. And do you also see with this encyclical another opportunity for the church to speak up? Like, how can we accompany the younger generation as church? And I don't know, Ernst, if you would also want to bring in, how did the church contribute at the time, and how can we keep that, so that we are really doing this work together, this fight together, with policymakers, with church, as one family.
Thank you very much for asking me. And let me come on with a new, much newer book by the Club of Rome. It is called Come On. And it has 3 chapters. And I tell you, the central chapter begins with Laudato Si by Pope Francis. Chapter 1 is, come on, don't tell me the current trends are sustainable. They are not. Chapter 2 is, come on, don't stick to outdated philosophies. And chapter 3 is, come on, join us on an exciting journey towards a sustainable world. So the central one, don't stick to outdated philosophies. This is essentially what the Pope has been saying. We have a whole subchapter about Laudato Si, in which we are in full praise of this encyclical, where he, among other things, says the greed, the massive acceleration, the permanent elbow kind of competition is destroying our common home. So that has been a very important lesson to people who are willing to listen to the Pope.
Thank you. Monica, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I think churches carry a lot of responsibility. I made a little list in my notes. Well, first of all, churches have a lot of money. There are investments that you can move. They're probably in fossil fuels if you haven't checked them. Some churches are starting to move them deliberately, which is nice. Churches also tend to own, honestly, a whole lot of land. Surprisingly, a lot of land is owned by churches, and a lot of buildings, obviously. So how those buildings and that land is managed has a large impact on energy consumption and local biodiversity issues. But maybe more importantly than the money or the land or the buildings, churches also tend to have the ear of some people who won't listen to me because they think I am at the age of 29 now, but a child. So if you could please talk to some of those people who won't listen to me and explain to them why this matters, because there is a bit of a gap in many countries, and the church is sometimes an authority figure and speaks from a set of values that can reach some people from a Christian perspective to understand why they have a moral obligation to think about the way they vote and the way they consume and the way they do many things that I will not be able to reach with any debate article that I'm writing or any strike that I am going to. So religious leaders there, they have work to do in explaining to people how protecting nature and other fellow men follows from the values that we show up every Sunday to talk about. So no pressure there, but it's really one of the actors in society that needs to actually step up and use some of that power.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an important message. I think also it's also one of the reasons we're having these reflection days, yeah, because we are church as well, and we are exchanging together. And I think that it's about being able to share in the different areas where we are active, all of us, to ensure that this message keeps high on the agenda, keeps being listened to, and remembering that this is for our common good. It's something joyful, it's something good. So definitely, I don't think there would be an issue of younger, older, hierarchy, non-hierarchy. The good thing is that the Pope is taking a leadership here. So I think it's also empowering us all as church to bring it on and to really take our own responsibility. And I guess that awareness for all of us about our possible contribution is really important. I see that, we're, first of all, I see two things. One is that we are coming a little bit close to the closing of this session. The other is that there's still a couple of questions in the chat. So both of them are for Ernst, as I can see. One says that you were speaking about, which was rather a comment, sorry. It was saying that probably you were referring to Professor Meadows from the MIT and coordinator of the report Limits of Growth. And the other is that, so there is a question from Simone saying that, how can you best catch up quickly with the production of solar panels and photovoltaics in Germany and in Europe in this historic moment? And the other question to you as well is a statement from Laura Morosini saying that she appreciated a lot the Sustainable Europe from Wuppertal Institute, and will there be a new version for today? Because more people would listen to it now. So if you can just briefly get back to that, and then I'm also gonna give a last word to Monica before I wind up. So if you respond also now, Ernst, first to these comments, questions, and then say maybe one final word, and then I'll give a final word to Monica as well.
Let me first begin with the Wuppertal Institute. It was absolutely fantastic that the province of North Rhine-Westphalia would sponsor an institute of 50 paid scientists and assistants for talking about climate, environment, and energy. And I was a bit of a wild president. For instance, I hired a young lady who would be called a feminist expert on transport. Have you ever heard such a thing? Well, this was one turnover idea of rethinking transportation and mobility from the point of view of females. So we did things which typical scientific institutes would never do. And I had a vice president, Bio Schmidt-Blick, who said we need a factor of 10 of improving resource productivity, against something no university of the world would dare to touch. So the Wuppertal Institute was a fantastic, although a little bit crazy institute, but full of life. We had visitors from Latin America, from Africa, from around the world, because it was an inspiring atmosphere. So much for that. And I'm extremely grateful again to the province and to the staff, eventually 200 people. Okay. Then the catch up with the production of solar energy. Well, in the meantime, you see the major utilities moving away from nuclear and coal and moving towards renewables, because they see that this is the future. So much is happening, and the German law for renewable energies, I believe, was the trigger, and the Chinese were quite clever, more or less imitating the German law, leading to a boom of renewable energies in China. So that's, I think, a basically profitable new agenda. And then speaking about Meadows, it was J. Forrester who was the professor. Dennis Meadows at the time, I believe, was 25 years old. He was not a professor yet. And his wife, neither, Dana Meadows. But he was sort of the most vocal voice in the public arena. And today, in the year 50 years after the publication of The Limits to Growth, of course, Dennis Meadows is the star. Unfortunately, Dana Meadows had died 5 or 10 years ago. So Dennis Meadows is really a hero for me.
Thank you so much, Ernst, and thank you also for having been part of this conversation this morning. That's really appreciated and helpful for the conversations as we go ahead. I'd like to pass over the floor to Monica for some last words in the session.
Well, I will just use the opportunity to say thank you for the work that you are doing. And I hope it grows and spreads real quick to all parts of the religious communities. I have hoped to see more green churches and more religious groupings at our demonstrations, even more of the civil disobedient kinds, like the Christian Climate Action in the UK, gluing themselves to things and getting themselves arrested. All of that diversity of ways of expressing the love and that we have to our fellow humans. So good luck with that, rooting for you, and I hope you have a really good event.
Thank you so much, Monica, as well, and thank you for rooting for us. Thank you for being with us, and definitely we are bringing on these reflections and this work, and as we can within the Alliance, through the Alliance, and through other means. And the wish is really to ensure that we have a commitment, hopeful commitment, joyful commitment. And I wanted to share just my screen for a second. I hope you will be able to see it now. Can you let me know if you can see my screen? Or not yet? Now share. I think now you'll be able to see my screen. Yeah? Can you let me know if that's okay? Yeah. So this, maybe some of you have seen this comic before. I got it from a colleague from within the ELSiA. So you will see there's a climate summit here going on, and then there's this $1 million question from the floor saying, so what if it's just a big hoax and we create a better world for nothing? And then you can see on the other side, you know, what would be the impact of us creating a better world? Well, energy independence, preserving rainforest, sustainability, green jobs, livable cities, renewables, clean water, healthy children, hope for the future, and the list goes on. So why don't we just take the steps needed? We create something good. It's a joyful journey. It should be a joyful journey. It's for the common good of the planet. It's also for our common good. So I think that's really important to look at it from this perspective, that we are doing this for something good. Not looking at it from all the sacrifices we need to make or whatever. I think this comes from the fear that many of us are carrying. But let's take the steps. Let's create this better world that we would be enjoying hugely. This generation, the coming generations. So let's just do it. Thank you. I think we are straight on time, and this means that you will have a short break now for some 15 minutes before we are continuing. And I will then hand over the floor to my colleague Stefan Lunthe from Justice and Peace Europe. So thanks a lot. Have a good coffee break, and let's catch up in 15 minutes.
Okay.